Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and thanks for watching. Well, how much does it cost to educate a student in the schools in Pennsylvania? How much should it cost? The answer to those two questions in a few moments, but first, my exclusive interview with one of the founders of the Pennsylvania Reform Movement, all after these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, I have with me today Tim Potts. He's the co-founder of Democracy Rising. I'm going to chat with Tim a little bit about the status of the reform movement. As everybody knows, since the infamous pay hike of July 2005, there were several reform groups organized to put Pennsylvania government back on track. Tim, or should I say on the track, or back on, how would you phrase it?
You look at Pennsylvania's history, as you do with regularity, and it's pretty sorry, you know.
Yeah, we need to get it on track, not back on track.
And while we're doing the job, we may as well do it better than anybody else in America.
Yeah, well, I think we would all agree with that. All right, Tim, let's just sort of go through some of the big elements in what you're trying to accomplish. All right. One of the here we go. We're 9 months into this, 10 months into the 11 months into the calendar year. Time just flies right by.
Right.
And I think all of us expected after the midterm elections last year, when 54 new members went into the legislature, that there'd be a pretty heavy emphasis on changing the culture in Harrisburg. But let's just go through these things. Open records law, where do we stand on this, and why is that important?
Nowhere.
No.
We have a House bill that's worse than the current law in its current version, and it's just sitting there. It hasn't even come up for a final vote yet. We have a Senate bill that's somewhat better, but still nowhere near the best in America, the kind of law that Pennsylvania deserves. So we've actually accomplished nothing.
Now, by open records, briefly give us, what does that mean to the average citizen out there?
It means that whether it's themselves as citizens or members of the news media can look into the way government makes decisions and the way government spends money. A classic example, I guess, is Feir from the past year, right? Where you're seeing how they're spending all of this money on bonuses, on retreats, on legal bills to try to keep people from finding out how they're spending money. And, you know, it proves the point that corruption costs. A lot of times they say, oh, well, you know, it's not that expensive. You're kidding me. Corruption costs hundreds of millions of dollars every year. That's what we're trying to get at. Now,
one of the things that has to be done, and we'll move on to some other things, is that the presumption in the current law has to change, which current law is, what, about 50 years old? And
right, 1957.
Yeah, and the presumption is that you've got to demonstrate why you should have it instead of the other way around. State government has to say, give a reason why you can't have it. That's a pretty important principle, is it not?
Oh, it certainly is. But then you have to craft the exceptions very narrowly, the way most states do. Right now, you know, the exceptions in what's being discussed in the House, accepting email, for example. Yeah. It's ridiculous. That's like exempting paper.
Paper, right.
Especially in this age. That's the way business gets done. And you look at the news about former Representative Frank LaGrotta being indicted along with his sister and his niece. They wouldn't be able to do that if they hadn't had access to the email records proving what was going on.
All right, so open records, not very much. Let's talk about campaign finance reform. Now, we have a reporting law in this state. We don't have to get into the debate about whether or not we should be public financing. That's pretty controversial. But in this state, you can a person who puts together a campaign committee can get as much money as often as they want from any source except union contributions and, I guess, businesses for as long as they want and spend it on almost anything. What's going on with campaign finance? I know what you're going to say, but what's going on with it?
We have one of the worst laws in America, no surprise. All of our laws dealing with public integrity are among the worst in America, if not the worst. Campaign finance is something that we're going to have to address in one way or another. The members of the 11 reform groups that have been working in coalition for the past 3 years are divided on that as well. And this is an issue that really demands a lot of public attention. But, you know, you can't say with a straight face that people should not be able to know who's trying to influence elections to what amount, and that some reasonable limits ought to be placed.
Yeah, I mean, just for our viewers, I mean, you could give $500,000 or $1 million. Now, I don't think there are many people giving $1 million, but as often as you want into campaign committees, and then those campaign committees can contribute to another campaign committee, irrespective of maybe the wish
Right.
of the original donor. Does that make any sense at all?
Oh, I don't think so. You know, and you have campaign committees making donations to charity rather than returning the money to the donors when you find out that the donor is giving you bad money. Well, that's not allowed under the Pennsylvania election law. You have to spend it on an electoral contest.
Right.
But then you have John Purcell last year spending all this money on, sending Chinese food to his babysitters. I mean, this is not what people contribute money to do.
And then the other thing, under the election code, as I understand it, expenditures from campaign committees can be used to, quote, influence elections, which means you could travel to a resort with 3 or 4 of your campaign staff people, enjoy the amenities of a resort, and say, well, we were studying or analyzing the election, so there really no, or buy a suit of clothing or rent a car. I mean, it's pretty loose, isn't it?
Most of Pennsylvania's laws dealing with public integrity have loopholes large enough to drive a crook through.
Yeah. All right, we're chatting with Tim Potts. We're sort of reviewing the items in the reform agenda. We'll continue with that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Pennsylvania Medical Society, doctors and patients, preserve the relationship. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association, business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back to the program. I'm chatting with Tim Potts, a co-founder of Democracy Rising, one of the premier reform groups in the state. All right, Tim, let's talk about certain gifts and travel. And at the moment, is there any limit at all on what, let's say, lobbyist A could do in terms of travel and gifts for an individual legislator? No,
the only limit is on what they have to report. So that if you give somebody a gift valued at under $250, you never have to report it, and neither does the recipient.
But now even Congress has a limit on the gifts and the travel.
Right.
And there's none. I mean, so for example, if somebody wanted to take a legislator away for a weekend, that would be okay as long as they reported it.
As long as they disclose it, right.
You know, one of the things that I thought might really be helpful is that all the lobbyists would think a limit would not be a bad idea.
Tell you what, Terry,
because,
most lobbyists think that.
Yeah.
Lobbyists do not want to spend all their nights away from their families.
Yeah.
They do
and
not
I want to say something.
You know.
Lobbying in and of itself is not, look, it's not a bad profession. There's certainly nothing wrong with, there are thousands of them. They represent a multiplicity of concerns and interests. There's not a thing wrong. It's an honorable profession, but they live in the culture that they didn't create. I mean, it's a culture that, go ahead, finish it.
Exactly. I mean, they can't change the rules. They will live by whatever rules the legislature sets. And the legislature sets these rules that are just absurd, that undermine public confidence, that make life harder on lobbyists than it already is. You know, we just need to get a grip on that. And 66% of Pennsylvanians want to prohibit gifts, meals, travel, entertainment to public officials. Why don't we give the citizens what they want, especially when it raises the standards of public integrity?
No, I understand it. All right, so look, not arguably, the reform movement was divided in the elections last month about what to do with the judges, 67 judges, 60 counties, 7 appeals, stood for retention. The reform movement was divided about what to do about them. They were overwhelmingly put in for another 10 years. Was it a mistake to go after all 67 of those judges, in your opinion?
Well, I think it was overreaching. I think if the folks who were working on those campaigns had targeted the Supreme Court Justice Tom Saylor, specifically over his rulings on the way the legislature passes laws, for example, it could have been a lot more effective. And I think it was a mistake to look at it in terms of a body count. You know, we're not interested in a body count. We measure success by how much more engaged people are in the business of government, and also by whether government is in fact improving. And to us, that's what matters. It's not how many people you throw out.
Well, before you leave, let me ask you this question, final question. look, 31 people didn't run for the Pennsylvania legislature. Incumbents did not stand for re-election in 2006. Another 24 or so lost in the election who did run. What do you think is going to be the climate in 2008? Are we going to have a lot of resignations? Let me ask you that question.
I think
a lot
we
of
will.
folks who won't run.
And partly it's what's building that head of steam now. The bonus gate investigation, you know, things are going to start coming out as a result of that. But even before the first indictments last week, I was hearing numbers of up to 50 members of the legislature who were going to retire and just say, we've had it, you know, time for somebody else. So it's entirely possible that in a period of 26 months, we will turn over more than half of the Pennsylvania legislature.
Yeah. One of the things that sort of surprised me was that even with 54, that the pace of reform has been glacial. That I know that it's Pennsylvania legislature is pretty much a leadership-driven entity. Well, look, as always, thanks for coming in. This was a great update. You'll come back next year when we're going to keep tabs on you guys in the reform movement to find out what's going on.
Anytime, Tim.
All right,
Thank
education. How much does it cost to educate a student in Pennsylvania, in the state? You're going to find us out. Plus, how much should it cost? A big study was just conducted. We're going to bring you the results of it back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. Well, the question in the promo, how much does it cost? Meaning, how much should we pay to educate a student in the schools in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania? How much are we paying and how much should we pay? Joining me to answer those questions is Karl Girton. He's the chairman of the State Board of Education, and Dr. Robert Feir. He's the project manager, I presume, for this study. Robert,
yes.
Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
From the State Board of Education, and one of the true experts on education in the state of Pennsylvania. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, Karl, you're the chairman, so we get to talk to you first. All right. As I indicated earlier on, we have an amount of money that we pay right now per student in the state of Pennsylvania. How much is that?
It's about $9,500.
All right, it's $9,500. Now, before we talk about an increase, which is what the study that was commissioned by the State Board recommends, on what basis should we make an increase?
Well, the basis that we undertook this study was, what would it take to provide the resources to bring all students in this Commonwealth to a mastery of the 12 academic standards? And that number, which was ultimately developed by probably the most reputable organization in the country that does these studies. There have been 35 of them done in the country. This is probably the 21st, and so these people have done the vast majority of them. Turns out to be $12,057 on average statewide. That represents about a 26% increase over the current expenditures that both the local, state, and federal governments are currently spending on per pupil in this Commonwealth. And the interesting aspect of this is that we've now defined precisely what it is students need to know and be able to do to earn a diploma, but it's been a long time since anybody actually looked at what it costs to have the resources to afford students the opportunity to master these standards.
Yeah. Now, Bob, when we're talking about we're talking about doing this to improve performance, and in the report I noticed that you talk about a whole variety of things that goes in. I mean, what are we trying to improve here exactly? Just the scores on tests, or how students learn? I mean, if we're going to go, I think the citizens of this state are pretty supportive of public education. We know that from a multitude of surveys that get done. What is it that we're going to, specifically that you would tell our viewers out there they'll get if they buy into this notion of a 25 or 6% increase?
Well, first of all, with respect to the test score part of your question, the standard that the consultants were looking at includes mastery of state standards in 12 academic areas. The state only tests a couple of those. And the state has historically left it up to school districts to determine how students are mastering the rest of them, social studies, the arts. So, in fact, this study is not simply about passing math and reading tests. It really is about a much broader sense of the curriculum.
As it should be, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And the board was very clear with the consultants from the beginning that they didn't want simply the cost of getting every kid to pass a couple of tests. Because
so
that's
this
not
is
what
like
the
a
schools are about.
holistic, I mean, the board's looking, this is a holistic approach about trying to make sure that when people graduate, if they want to go to, on to college, that's fine. If they want to go into the workforce, that's fine also. Go to technical school or whatever. But we're talking about sort of a larger approach than typically what we might see if we're just measuring a few standards.
Yeah, this is, I mean, it's critical that we be able to define and then measure what it is that we want students to know and be able to do so that they can, in fact, as you have suggested, enter the workforce, earn a living, and develop a career path that will permit them to support a family. And that's really what we told the consultants that we wanted them to do in terms of defining and then costing out the resources necessary to make that possible for all students in the Commonwealth.
Yeah, well, Bob, how do we get from how do we get to this 26% increase? We don't need at this moment to get into how we pay for it. That's another issue. This never-ending debate over property tax reform, which we can have you guys on. You can come back and help us get into that. Well, this is an important subject, how we pay for it. But go ahead. How do we get to that 25% increase?
Well,
go ahead.
I mean, as Karl pointed out, these studies have been done in 30-some-odd states over the course of the past decade or so. And the states that have actually used the studies to try to develop new finance systems have phased them in over a period of time, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years in the case of Maryland. I mean, I can't imagine how you would increase the resources for education 26% in 1 year.
Yeah.
And the consultants
we know that's going to be difficult to do, right?
And
in our state.
And the consultants don't suggest doing that. And their experience in other states has been that states that develop sensible plans using the results of studies like this can develop a series of funding streams that kick in over a period of time.
Yeah, we're going to go to a break. I mean, I noticed just in the, since this report is out, there have been a lot of editorials about it. They mostly seem right on track. I mean, arguing that you're moving in the right direction. They may, disagree with some of the specifics, but we'll talk about this. And I want to get into we want to get into this business of equity and fairness in terms of how the education dollars are spent. We'll do that when we return.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Penn Future, where we believe that every environmental victory grows the economy, and by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program. I'm talking with Karl Girton, who chairs the State Board of Education, and Dr. Robert Feir, who was a project manager on this big costing out study that was released a couple of weeks ago. All right, Karl, I want to go another piece to this. In fact, the second piece of it had to do with the so-called equity issue. That's how much each school district gets to spend on its students. And, I mean, boy, has that been a huge debate in the state of Pennsylvania about figuring out how much state money should go in to equalize, for the various school districts. What is the recommendation in this study about how to deal with the equity piece?
Well, the equity piece, of course, was the other issue that was in the contract. The adequacy piece we already talked about, what it costs to bring the resources to all students. And the equity piece really cuts two ways. It deals with the student and whether the student, in fact, has access to those resources. And we know, for example, in the least wealthy districts in the Commonwealth, there's $155,000 of wealth per student.
Right.
In the wealthiest district, there's $2.8 million, or 84 times more wealth.
I'm going to interrupt here and ask you a question. And this just isn't urban schools. This is rural.
No, absolutely.
See, there's this myth around here, around this state, that somehow it's just the urban schools. Bob, you're shaking your head.
It is both. It's absolutely both.
And that we ought to be, when we get concerned about how much is spent in each school district, it's a statewide. Go ahead, you finish.
Well, I mean, the bottom line here is whether students who are born in one zip code should have the same opportunity as those in a wealthier district. And I think pretty universally people think that we should all have the same opportunity or afford our sons and daughters the same opportunity. And that really is the equity piece. And how you balance that really is a significant policy decision. But we can't continue. Students who are born in the least wealthy districts, the taxpayers are actually making, in some cases, twice the effort that those in the wealthiest districts who need actually less money.
So, Bob, just to kind of draw this to a head here, we've got the problem that you're going to have that 26% increase in the cost that's going to have to be paid somehow, and then trying to get folks in Harrisburg, in the legislature in particular, to deal with these differentials. You know, every legislator wants as much money as they can for their own, and that's understandable, right? I mean, nothing particularly wrong about that.
Right.
So you've got two big sort of pieces, if we can draw conclusions to this. Is that correct?
I think that is correct, and I think that the challenge for the General Assembly and the governor will be to figure out how you provide young people in communities across the state with the kind of opportunity Karl is talking about, without asking individual legislators to harm their own constituents.
Yep. All right, great. Look, great update. Come back when this thing gets rolling. We'll get a progress report from you in the spring.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching Pennsylvania Newsmakers. See you next week, and stay well.